Everyone, Ian Patrick here, and tonight we're reviewing our very first David Lane film, which is surprising to me. I think it's probably because I'm always a little intimidated to review the films of great directors, and in my opinion, David Lane is definitely top five, maybe top three directors of all time. Very important to British cinematography. And tonight we are reviewing The Passionate Friends, and it came out in 1949, and it was a Cineguild Productions film, which David Lane was he basically owns part of that company. It's a short film. It's an hour and a half film, a romance drama, an incredible, beautiful, beautiful romance drama picture. It was originally a novel written by H.G. Wells, and I'll tell you why that's kind of interesting here in a second. And I want to note that the cinematographer of the film was Guy Green, and I note him because I feel like cinematographers don't get enough credit, and Guy Green had worked on, I believe, Oliver Twist and probably Great Expectations as well with David Lane. And today we're relying a lot on this amazing biography book about David Lane. So The Passionate Friends, it stars Todd. She plays the main character, Mary. And I'll note right away that this was the first of a David Lane and Todd trilogy. There are two other films with them that he directed with where she starred in. Trevor Howard is also in this as Stephen Stratton, and also the great Claude Rains, who we talked about in our last review, actually is one of my favorite actors, and honestly one of the main reasons I wanted to watch this. And it's just a good summer romance picture in my opinion. And Claude Rains plays Howard Justin, and basically Ann Todd, Mary's character, or Mary, is married to Howard in the movie. Now, I recently went on a trip to Salt Lake City, of all places. I'm not Mormon, nothing against Mormons, but I'm not Mormon. But I was in Salt Lake City with friends, and everyone was going out every night. I went out quite a bit with them. And then one night I was in my hotel, and I thought, I just really, really want to watch a classic film. I want to relax tonight. And I picked The Passionate Friends for my picture to watch on my little vacation. Perfect black and white movie just for watching in bed. And I realized a little bit into the movie, I had seen this movie before. I don't remember when, but I'm sure, have you all had moments like that where you pick a movie, a classic movie to watch, and sort of midway or some point in the movie you're like, I've seen this before, and this movie's great, or maybe you didn't like it, but I definitely had that with this, and I remembered liking it the first time. So right away it starts out with a narration from Ann Todd's character, Mary. We see her, she's on a plane, and she's sort of talking to herself in her mind, and she's on a plane, and she's excited for a vacation, and I believe it was like a Swiss flight, because she makes a kind of a big deal out of how beautiful this flight is, and they offer fruit, and it's just a very relaxing flight for her. And so she's going somewhere, and she's going somewhere beautiful, and it ends up being this beautiful villa at Lake Annecy in France. It's like France and bordering Switzerland. So Lake Annecy is where they shot at least the scenes at the lake. And right away she's talking about some love of hers, and you don't really know, or I didn't really know exactly what was going on, but she's talking about some man that she's been in love with. And we see that she goes into her room in this villa, and it just sort of shows her balcony and another balcony next door, and she talks about the guest next door in a mystical way. Who is staying with next door to her? And Next, we see Trevor Howard's character Steven. He walks into the villa and he just, he looks very, very handsome. He walks in and we can assume that Mary is talking about Steven, Trevor Howard's character, and we see he walks up and he goes into his room about in the balcony that's right next to Mary's, and Mary's light turns off, and they don't meet each other that night, but it's like they're both thinking of each other that night. And we'll later learn that I guess they weren't aware that they were both there at the same time. But we then get a flashback, and there's several flashbacks in this movie, but we get a flashback, and this is where I'm like, okay, this is a David Lane picture, because this is where we see David Lane's just. I think that a lot of people talk about Hitchcock, but I think David Lane just mastered the black and white picture. Like, it's just every single scene in this movie could be a photograph because it's just so beautifully filmed in black and white. And we cut scene in this flashback. She's like having a dream or a flashback, and we see a London square, and it's on New Year's Eve. And in typical David Lane fashion, it's a shot from a crane, so we're looking down at this great London square, and it's just like his amazing shots in like Oliver Twist and Great Expectations, and it's a huge New Year's Eve celebration. And I want to note the skeleton costumed people. It's kind of creepy, the skeleton costumes in the London square. And just note the set design, just how incredible the set is. They spent you can tell they spent money, like the crane and the baby, I think it was, and just the New Year decorations. So I guess you could technically watch this around New Year's Eve, I guess. And just the setting right here, I was instantly hooked in this movie. Just everything going on in that scene, I'm like, okay, this is gonna be great. And we see Mary. She's down in the square, and she's in a beautiful gown, sort of like a princess gown. And of course, she bumps into her old love, Steven. So it's like, okay, well, I guess they know each other, but we can tell that they've been separated, and because they're sort of talking like old friends, sort of like old lovers. And they sort of kiss each other on the cheek, and it's great to see you, Mary, and that sort of thing. And you can tell, and I want to note just how Trevor Howard he's sort of underappreciated, I think, especially in this movie, how great he was in it, just how he looks at her. He had sort of a sparkle in his eye, just looking at Mary. And he kisses her on the cheek, and basically they go their separate ways. And then he talks to his actual girlfriend, so then we're like, okay, he's a taken guy, and she's pretty, but she's not quite as elegantly beautiful as Mary. And then Mary, she goes up to the balcony, and where you can assume, okay, that's where the wealthy people are at. And she goes up there, and it doesn't look as fun because everyone's having fun in the square, dancing and cheering and singing. She goes up there with her older husband, and of course her older husband is Claude Rains' character, Howard Justin. And it just doesn't look fun up there. And she's looking down, and she's looking for Steven. She's looking around for him, and she spots him. And I also want to note that Howard is dressed as a count, something like a count. So they're like this very proper, rich couple. And she says, do you want to dance? I would love to dance. So they go down to the square, and Steven and Howard, they see each other, and they briefly talk. And it's funny because Howard remembers that Steven he remembers that Steven is her ex-love, but he doesn't really pay too much mind to it, because he's he's a confident guy and he doesn't want to give any sort of power over um, to Steven, and he doesn't want to look jealous. So then when they're leaving the square, they get into a car, and Mary, she's just thinking about Steven, her old love. And then we get it's kind of Inception like, we get a flashback within a flashback, because she sort of dozes off in the car, she's daydreaming, and she has a flashback finally we back to when she was in an actual relationship with Steven, um, and we see sort of how they fell in love, and just how beautiful of a relationship they really had. And she even we see the part where she tells Steven, I will only truly really love you. You're the only man who I will really love, but I can't marry you. And I sort of gathered, like, okay, she's not going to marry him because she wants someone with more status, maybe she wants someone with more money. Um, so she doesn't agree to marriage with him, and they sort of break up in a poor manner. And it cut scenes back uh, to Mary in the car. She wakes up and she's with Howard. She's back to that with her husband, and we can quickly gather that, okay, it doesn't really seem like Mary loves her husband. She doesn't love Claude Rains. Poor Claude Rains. Um, and then we see that Howard, he tells her basically the next day, I've got to go on a work vacation. I'm going to be gone for a while. And we can see the wheels cranking in Mary's brain, that she's probably excited because she can go see her old boyfriend, Steven. And this is basically when the affair begins, because Steven ends up because they're both just they can't stop thinking about each other after seeing each other on New Year's Eve. And he calls her and they meet up with each other. And note the scene where she goes over to his place, and he's cooking that little oven roasted chicken, and it looks good. And she's just looking around, sort of admiring his little life. And of course, they talk about how they always really loved each other, and they basically kiss, and there it goes. The affair begins, and they're seen having a great time all over the countryside and all over London with each other. And eventually, of course, her husband has to come back from his work trip. Howard comes back, and right away, I think he sort of can tell something's up, because she tells him, I've been spending time with Steven while you've been gone. And he's just kind of like, oh, like that Claude Rains eyebrows raise or whatever. Um, and she tells her husband, yeah, I'm going to be going to the theater with Steven. So this is one of the best scenes of the entire movie, where she goes on this date with Steven, but of course they don't end up actually going to the theater. And her husband, he discovers the tickets, like she didn't even take the tickets for the theater show. So his mind is going crazy. Apparently they didn't go to the theater. And then he's talking to his secretary about work business, and he can't focus. So, and I love the secretary, I can't remember the actress's name, but she was great. Just her facial expressions throughout the movie. So he just can't shake the feeling that something's up. So he puts on his theater outfit and he goes to the theater, and there's the great scene where he walks in, he hands his ticket over, and then he looks down at the seats in the theater, and two seats are empty because Mary and Stephen aren't there. And instantly he walks back out, and the ticket taker is like, what? um, so then he goes back home, and we see Mary before they get before Mary gets home. She's talking with Stephen like, we're gonna have to eventually tell we're gonna have to tell him, that you're gonna divorce him. You're gonna come with me because you've always really loved me. You don't love Howard. And so they're making this plan of how they're gonna end up telling him. However, when they go in, of course, Howard already knows what's up, but they don't know that he knows. And so Claude Rains, Howard, basically tortures the two. He's like, no, come on in, because he just wants to quickly drop her off. But he comes in, and while he's pouring a drink, Mary sees the theater show, the pamphlet for the show, and she realizes, oh my gosh, he knows. And so then the confrontation happens, and Stephen tries to explain that she loves me. I'm sorry. And Mary's just like, just go. I need to talk to my husband. And Claude Rains is very good with his angry voice. He basically yells at him to get out. So it then cuts scenes to poor Stephen. He's left alone. He doesn't know what's going on with Mary, because Mary's not answering his calls or anything. And we don't know, is Mary actually going to end up running away with him? And eventually he gets a letter from Mary, and the letter says, I can't be with you. I'm going to stay with my husband. And so Stephen believes that Howard forced her to write that letter. So he storms over to their house, and he says, and he's demanding to see Mary. And Howard's like, she has comfort with me. We had a great marriage until you popped up and sort of ruined it. If you want to see Mary, go right ahead. And so he sees Mary, and she says, I did write that letter. I'm staying with my husband. And of course she's heartbroken, because she's torn between her comfortable life with Howard and having a passionate romance with Stephen. So they go away, and actually Stephen storms off because he's upset about it, that she made her choice basically for wealth and status and comfort. And finally we go back to, I guess, present time, which is where the film started. We go back to the beautiful villa in France, Switzerland, on the lake. And we where she's vacationing, and we see now she's at this cafe on the lake. Beautiful. I can't even imagine how beautiful it probably looks there in color, but she's at the cafe on the lake, and she sees Stephen, of course. And it's funny, you can see the nervous look on Howard's secretary, because she's at the lake with Mary. Howard's not there, fortunately, but we can see that the secretary is already nervous. And I want to note how there's a lot of outdoor filming scenes in this, and even the outdoor scenes in black and white are gorgeous, beautiful, and that is not easy to film outside in black and white. When we get to a lot of history that I have, it talks a lot about the weather. They had to wait in between clouds. They would film 25 seconds, and then they'd have to wait for hours and hours. So David Lane just was a master. But no, so they go, Howard or Stephen and Mary, they're happy to see each other. They're older, but they're happy, and they go on this grand boat ride with each other out on the lake. And then they go on a picnic, and they hike in the Alps. It's beautiful, and everything is just so dreamlike. It truly is. And we learn that Stephen, he's happily married now, and he has children. and she seems happy for him, but we also I got a sense that she still seems to long to be with Steven, but he seems to be doing well. And then, they she eventually has to take her back from their little picnic, and Howard comes early to the vacation villa. He comes, and because Mary doesn't know he's coming, and it's a surprise. And when the secretary sees that Howard's there, she's terrified, because they're out on the restaurant above the lake, and he grabs the binoculars and he's looking out on the lake. He's looking for his wife, and then and then he sees his wife. Well, he doesn't see his wife, but as he's looking with the binoculars, the secretary gets terrified. She stands up and she runs off, because eventually she knows that Mary's gonna walk up with Steven, and and he and her husband Howard eventually does see that it is Steven that she was out on the lake with. And of course his thought is that, oh my gosh, here we are again. She's still 10 years have passed. I think it was 10 years, and she's still running off with him. Like, I just can't deal with this anymore. So basically what he does very cleverly, he goes into Mary's villa room, and he's sitting in a corner, and he watches as Mary, she just runs in, and we see a very clever shot. Steven is on the boat going off into the distance, and we see Mary waving, and she's crying, she's sad, because her true romantic love is leaving again. And as she's crying, and then she looks up and she's terrified, she's shocked, because her husband was watching the whole time. And in my mind I was like, okay, is this movie gonna get really dark? Is he gonna murder her? But no, it's a more realistic film, and it just cutscenes to he filed for divorce. So then we see that Mary's on her own. She goes to go see Steven again. She's trying to hook up again with Steven. Maybe they can finally be together, but she sees that Steven's happily married, and she doesn't want to ruin that. So she's sort of alone and depressed, but she talks with Steven, and Steven says, maybe just go talk to him. He'll take you back. And she gets the idea to do that, and she does go back to see her husband. And in this fantastic scene played by Claude Rains, at first he's happy to see her, but then he rips into her, basically telling her that you have made me hate myself because of how you've treated me, and how you've just continued to go off with him, and basically calls her all sorts of names, and I don't want anything to do with you. And I was like sort of cheering for him, because in this movie it's interesting, because throughout it, are you cheering for her husband who is she doesn't necessarily like in love, but he provides comfort, passion, and wealth. Obviously he does love her, or that relationship, it's her husband? Or do you prefer the romantic ex? So I can see the argument for her running off with both men, honestly. So after telling her off, she runs off. She's depressed, and we gather she's gonna end up killing herself. And in beautiful black and white, she goes down into the subway, and there's a huge sign, and it says "Way Out" with an arrow. I think there's an arrow pointing down, and of course that's alluding to her way out of life, like she's gonna go kill herself down in the subway. And cut scenes to Claude Rains, it cut scenes to Howard, and he's thinking, and he realizes, I think she forgets something, like she had brought something, and he sees it, and and it goes back to her, and the subway's going by, and as it's going by, she's closes her eyes, getting ready to fall, and you'll never forget this scene after you see it. And Howard comes from behind and grabs her and saves her from committing suicide, and they hug, and you're just happy that her husband is there, and he says, come on, let's go home. And she's like, I can go with you. And he's like, if you would like. And we can assume that everything works out, and they'll be happily together. And I forgot to note earlier the H.G. Wells thing. I know I'm getting a little off track here. It's funny because obviously Claude Rains was also in The Invisible Man, which was also a H.G. Wells novel. So his second H.G. Wells picture. Anyway, I'm going to give this film a 4 stars out of 4 stars. It is indeed a perfect film. I mean, I can't really criticize anything. I guess I could sort of criticize the confusion of the flashbacks within flashbacks and all that stuff, but it's not too complicated in my opinion. I mean, I picked up pretty quickly, but to me, I think this is just a perfect film. It's beautiful. The story's beautiful. The actors were perfect. Tell me in the comments below if you have criticisms for it, but the character development was great. Even seeing, because you sort of see Howard as a villain a little bit, but you start to feel more compassion for him as the film goes on, as they get older. This review went on pretty long, so I think I am going to cut it here. And if you really love the film The Passionate Friends, I encourage you to watch my my part 2 that will discuss the history of the film. Thank you for watching.